Okay, so welcome to today's webinar, which is around reproductive coercion and domestic violence. So today with us we have Kath Kerr from Children by Choice, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. First though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this webinar today. In Brisbane, they're the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the very important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. As this webinar is being viewed by people throughout the state, and I think there's a few people from interstate as well, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and welcome any First Australians listening to us today. So, as I mentioned, today we've got our webinar on reproductive coercion and domestic violence. And Kath, we're very fortunate to have Kath here today. She's done a lot of research on this topic and has a wealth of knowledge that she's going to share with us today. So she'll be talking about what reproductive coercion is, why it's important for family lawyers and others to know about this issue. And she'll also take us through some ways that you can respond to this issue when clients come to you, so on an individual basis and also on a systemic basis as well. So today's webinar is being recorded. The PowerPoints have been emailed out to everyone who registered as of this morning. If you need to download those handouts though, they're just in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and they're also up on our website. If you've got questions, we'll leave those over to the end if that's all right. So there are two ways you can ask questions. You can type your question into the question box and we'll read that out so everyone can hear and Kath can then answer. Or you can press the button that looks like a hand and we can unmute you if you've got a microphone and you can ask your question that way. Okay, great. Someone just had their hand up. I'm just wanting to make sure that there aren't any questions at this point. Kathy, did you have a question? If you can put your question into the question box, if you do have one for the moment, so that we can make sure everything's working. On that note, if you do have any technical difficulties today or have any sound issues, it'd be great if you could send through an email, and I'll be checking my emails throughout. We've just got Kath here in the office, so it's a bit tricky managing one computer screen with the questions that come through. So without further ado, I think I'll now pass over to Kath and I'll come back in towards the end of the session. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for your interest in this topic. I would like to start by joining Carly's acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking from today, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, and owners of all the land on which you're listening from, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Children by Choice also recognises the mothers of the stolen generation and apologises for the removal of their children by white Australians. So today I will be providing an overview of reproductive coercion and why it's important for practitioners to be aware of this issue. I'm also going to provide some practical tips for identifying or responding to disclosures of reproductive coercion and support services for you to be aware of. Additionally, I'm going to outline some of the systemic and access issues that clients may encounter in exercising their reproductive rights and choices. For your own awareness today, I'll be discussing some topics which might be challenging or confronting, including forced pregnancy, sexual violence and abortion. Please reach out for support yourselves if you need to, but also remain respectful in any questions or comments today of the 1 in 5 Australian women who have experienced sexual violence and the estimated 1 in 3 Australian women who will access an abortion in their lifetime. So Children by Choice is a Brisbane-based non-profit organisation providing statewide support. We offer counselling, information and education services on all options with an unplanned pregnancy, abortion, adoption and parenting, from a pro-choice and client-centred framework. We also deliver sexual and reproductive health education sessions in schools and youth centres and work to advance Queenslanders' reproductive choices and improve access to safe and legal abortion. Relevantly to today's webinar, over the past 5 years, we have seen a steep increase in the rates of violence disclosed by contacts to our counselling team. Partly, we believe, due to the increased profile of men's violence against women in the media and public spaces, and partly due to our own growing awareness of the prevalence of violence amongst our clients and the improved screening for violence and coercion by our counselling team. In 2016-17, 34.5% of our total clients disclosed domestic violence, 17.8% of total contacts involved reproductive coercion, and 15.3% sexual assault. Our data also shows that around a third of our contacts reporting domestic violence are also experiencing reproductive coercion, which highlights to us the need to incorporate an understanding of reproductive coercion when working with clients experiencing domestic violence. So reproductive coercion is an under-recognised strategy of control that denies reproductive and sexual health decision-making and access to options. It has far-reaching and challenging consequences for victims, including unplanned or unwanted pregnancy, loss of agency over pregnancy outcomes, sexually transmitted infections, and the risks of co-parenting with a perpetrator if the pregnancy is continued to birth. I would like to name that the existing research and analysis, including what I'll be discussing today, focuses on heterosexual cisgendered relationships, and highlight that further focus is needed on the control of fertility in our LGBTIQ communities and relationships. So the perpetration of reproductive coercion generally falls into the 3 categories there: pregnancy promotion, contraceptive sabotage, and pregnancy outcome control, along a continuum of before sexual intercourse, during sexual intercourse, and post-conception. However, reproductive coercion also includes deliberate actions to prevent pregnancy, force women to access abortion, and pressure to take contraceptives or undergo sterilisation. So I'm now going to break down those 3 key areas for you. So pregnancy promotion occurs where a woman is pressured, coerced, or forced to become pregnant against her wishes. Behaviours include pressure for unprotected sex, threats or statements that he is going to impregnate her, monitoring her menstrual cycles, pressuring or forcing her to use ovulation testing kits and pregnancy testing kits, closely monitoring her for signs of pregnancy, and threats or use of physical or sexual violence if she says she does not want to become pregnant or if she asks for contraception. Contraceptive sabotage and interference is where the woman's reproductive preferences are ignored or disregarded by her sexual partner through behaviours that prevent effective contraceptive use. Regardless of his intention to cause pregnancy or promote his own pleasure or indifference to the risk posed by unprotected sex, these actions violate the consent upon which sex may have been entered into and escalate the risks of unwanted pregnancy and STD transmission. The visibility of contraception and the requirements for its initiation also make it a space for control. Contraceptive pills, diaphragms, and condoms can be found and destroyed, vaginal rings taken out, intrauterine devices forcibly removed, appointments for contraceptive implants, injections, and sterilisation can be sabotaged, access to the morning after pill can be prevented, and fertility awareness methods and withdrawal can be ignored. Both pregnancy promotion and contraceptive interference may also include forced unprotected penetrative sex. Experiences of intimate partner sexual violence have been well documented. However, experiences of forced sex or rape with the explicit intention of impregnating the woman needs further attention. Sexual violence should not only inform our risk assessment for the elevated risk of serious harm or intimate partner homicide that it brings, but also the risks it has for unwanted pregnancy, particularly as a further barrier for her to leave the relationship safely. Sexual violence in the context of reproductive coercion includes behaviours of forced unprotected penetrative sex, forcing unprotected sex while the victim is asleep, repeated pressure and manipulation for unprotected penetrative sex, and other emotional manipulations to coerce an intimate partner for sex when she does not want to or is not able to give full and free consent. And many of these behaviours would fit definitions of rape within criminal statutes. Post-conception, perpetrators can then exert control over the outcome of the pregnancy for it to end in either an abortion or birth. Women who have experienced pressure to continue a pregnancy against their wishes have described behaviour including threats to harm or kill her if she has an abortion, shaming her privately and publicly for her decision to terminate the pregnancy, making promises of support they would offer her in co-parenting, and sabotaging her abortion appointment through refusing to financially contribute to the cost of the procedure or the transport to her appointment, forcing her to eat prior to her appointment so she is ineligible, being disruptive at the clinic so she feels pressure to leave, and obstructing her appointment access to the point where her gestation is too advanced to access the procedure. Pressure to end a pregnancy manifests through threats and actual use of violence in order to cause a miscarriage, forcing her to terminate the pregnancy and lie to the medical staff at the clinic regarding her consent, and preventing her access to prenatal care. The dynamics of domestic violence do not often facilitate safe negotiation of contraception or the instance or timing of penetrative sex. Not only does reproductive coercion occur within a context of other violent and controlling behaviours, but those behaviours often reinforce the perpetration of reproductive coercion itself. Fears to negotiate contraception or resist unwanted sex may be related to threats or use of physical or sexual violence, accusations of infidelity if contraception is used or asked for, or threats to end the relationship. Women may engage in coerced sex to prevent further escalation of violence or as a survival strategy to prolong the time between violent incidents. When it comes to her sexual and reproductive agency, women must weigh up any gain she may get in using contraception or refusing sex against the potential loss of safety through an increased risk of violence as a result of that refusal, of asking for a condom, or of him discovering her contraception. So this is the context in which women may not only fall pregnant against their wishes, but also be forced to continue that pregnancy to term and commence lifelong co-parenting with her abuser. Women with an unintended pregnancy are 4 times more likely to experience physical violence from a partner compared with those with planned pregnancies. It is essential that we as practitioners support women experiencing pregnancy in domestic violence as best we can in whatever choices they make, whether it be to continue the pregnancy or not. But we also need to be aware of the red flags for coerced pregnancy and support clients to act preventatively and connect them to sexual health services to discuss contraceptive options or strategies. In family law, we see the impact on our clients of co-parenting with a perpetrator of domestic violence. And research supports our practice knowledge that having children in a violent relationship decreases the likelihood and ease of separation. She may be worried about the impact on the children of witnessing the violence directed at her, at the same time as being fearful of what would happen if she wasn't there to protect them. She may have fears she may lose her children in a custody battle, or that her violent partner would then have a court-ordered unsupervised contact time with them. Fears he may carry out threats to harm her, their children, or himself if she leaves. Economic and financial concerns, and self-doubt after being subjected to the perpetrator's emotional abuse, undermining her belief in herself and her abilities. Our current family law system is built on a principle that children have a right to a meaningful relationship with both parents, and it is incredibly hard to shift from that, even in cases of domestic violence. Our system offers a co-parenting perpetrator an ongoing means of contact through the system, of restricting where she can live, compelling her to disclose her address, exposing her to repeated, potentially stressful and expensive trips back through mediation and court to amend orders, on top of the continued contact through everyday life of co-parenting. Birthdays, Christmases, school events, medical appointments, in most cases will never be free of the co-parent's presence, either physically or symbolically. And it is all these factors which work together to support the perpetrator's control and manipulation over the woman, to cripple her belief in her ability to leave, and to maintain that power and control over her if she does, through family court processes or using the children as pawns. So once children are in the picture, it becomes a whole different ballgame for women to leave safely, remain safe, and keep their children safe. As practitioners, you may encounter women who have experienced or are experiencing reproductive coercion at various points in their life. Clients may be parenting children who are the result of reproductive coercion. They may be pregnant and coerced into continuing with the pregnancy. They may have been forced or pressured to terminate pregnancies, or they may be at risk of coerced pregnancy. So hopefully I've now painted a picture for you and built upon your own practice knowledge that pregnancy is utilised by some perpetrators of domestic violence as a deliberate tactic of control. Motivations for the perpetration of reproductive coercion and coerced pregnancy include masculine gender ideologies around fertility and beliefs that men who have many children are powerful. And some men seek to guarantee continued connection with their victim through pregnancy and co-parenting, and some hold a belief that they have ownership of women and their fertility. Women who have experienced reproductive coercion in the past may present with big families of many children, close together, or in age group clusters. Multiple past pregnancies can be a warning sign of his control, but as we also know that reproductive coercion often co-occurs with other forms of violence and control, it can indicate other high-risk factors such as sexual violence and coercive control that are important for us to be aware of. Women accessing legal service and support regarding domestic violence or family law may still be planning to separate from their partner or only recently separated, and therefore in the midst of some of the highest risk periods for intimate partner violence and homicide. Tactics of control during these periods can escalate or become more insidious. And linked to the ideology I spoke about before that some men seek continued connection with their victim through pregnancy and co-parenting, it's important to be aware of this risk during this period. Questions along the following lines could be helpful to best reduce risk and link your client in with necessary supports. So, is your client pregnant? And how is she feeling about that pregnancy? Would she like to discuss her pregnancy outcome options? Is she concerned about becoming pregnant against her wishes or before she is ready? Is she using contraception? And how does her partner react to or influence her contraceptive choices? And would she like some information about which contraceptive options would be suitable for her in her circumstances? It's also important to be very mindful of your language. Firstly, remember that despite social messaging that every pregnancy is a happy event, we know in reality this is far from the case. Steer clear of value-laden language such as baby or early or late, especially if the client has indicated her own ambivalence about continuing the pregnancy and indicates she would like to speak with someone about her options. Depending on her gestation, the option of abortion may not be available to her, in which case it's still important to link her with support around safety planning for her birth and early parenting. For women experiencing reproductive coercion or at risk of coerced pregnancy, contraception is also an important consideration. Please don't assume that because she is experiencing control that no contraception will work or be an option. Now, I know you won't be able to read the details of this, but last year, Children by Choice released this fantastic resource which outlines the available contraceptive methods in Australia, how they work, their efficacy, its visibility, and how it could be tampered with. If you haven't seen it already, I would strongly encourage you to have a look, and it's available online via the link at the bottom of the slide. So-called hidden contraceptives, such as the implanon, intrauterine devices, and hormonal injections, could all be workable for women experiencing domestic violence and wishing to avoid pregnancy. And if your client does want further support around preventing pregnancy, decision-making regarding her pregnancy, or accessing an abortion, it's important to know what support services are out there. So I've included a brief list and links on the last slide today. So I now hope that you've gained a small understanding and agree with me that assumptions that women seeking an abortion have simply failed to use contraception overlook not only the failure rates of modern contraceptives, but also the realities of reproductive coercion. For women who have decided to end their pregnancy, there are also a number of factors to navigate for access. Abortion in Australia is regulated at a state or territory level by criminal laws, health laws, or a combination of both. The laws are different in each jurisdiction, with varying issues of practical access. But today I'm talking specifically about the Queensland laws. So in Queensland, it's still a criminal offence to have an abortion, for doctors to provide an abortion, and for any person to provide anything at all which they know would be used for an abortion. However, abortion is still available through a small number of private accredited clinics across the state, as well as through accredited GPs who can prescribe the medication abortion pill. Medication abortion is available up until the 9th week of pregnancy and involves taking medication essentially to induce a miscarriage. Non-invasive surgical abortion is available through private clinics and the occasional public provider until the 15th or 19th week, depending upon the provider. And today, abortion is regarded by the World Health Organization as one of the safest and most common medical or surgical procedures when performed by a qualified health professional. In Queensland, both procedures have fees ranging from $350 to $800 for a medical abortion and $350 to $3,000 for surgical abortion, depending upon gestation and the provider. So I'm going to talk about the law specifically now. So the criminal offences of abortion lie under sections 224, 225 and 226 of the Queensland Criminal Code, with no legislated rationale, defence or exemption. But despite this, and abortion continuing to be provided across the state on a daily basis, only one woman, 2 doctors and 1 assister have ever been prosecuted in Queensland. These cases have been heard in the District Court, and while the Criminal Code has been arguably interpreted somewhat liberally on this, the absence of upper court precedent has created significant legal ambiguity when faced with such a blunt statute. What the Queensland courts have done is essentially follow the footsteps in other jurisdictions and interpreted the legislation so that the deliberate inclusions of the phrases unlawfully intended only to criminalise those procedures which had not been performed lawfully. So there must by implication be circumstances in which abortion would be lawful. Lawful exceptions to any offence are often adopted on the grounds of necessity and proportionality. And so we have our Queensland legal test for abortion. Abortion may be lawfully performed in circumstances where an honest and reasonable belief is held that the abortion is necessary to prevent serious harm from occurring to the pregnant woman, and the abortion is not disproportionate to the harm sought to be prevented. And we're just left with the can of worms now as to what serious harm means. Unfortunately though, despite this, in Queensland we still essentially rely on the police turning a blind eye to the hundreds of women they could be charging, the staff at the abortion clinics, and the many GPs across the state now offering medication terminations, perhaps because they know that there's this ready-made test to be used in a court of law. So we have a legal situation in Queensland where the procedure must have sufficient grounds in order to deem it lawful, and the woman presenting for the procedure must be a good storyteller. There is a lot of understandable concern around the legal ambiguity and the risk of prosecution under the Code, meaning that many doctors and hospitals are unwilling to provide terminations, even in cases where the legal test is clearly met. Following the criminal prosecution of the couple in Cairns in 2010 for procuring and assisting in an abortion, the Queensland Government broadened the Section 282 of the Criminal Code to include a defence for doctors providing medication as well as surgical abortion. And in March 2013, Queensland Health produced a guideline for the public therapeutic termination of pregnancy to attempt to clarify the legal considerations for the provision of abortion in Queensland public hospitals and establish best practice. And I've included a link to that guideline at the bottom of that slide. But sadly, despite this, still only 1% of abortions in Queensland are performed in public hospitals, with many still refusing to provide the procedure regardless of the woman's circumstances. So abortion law is not clear or straightforward, which detrimentally impacts service provision, availability of accurate information, and a woman's capacity to negotiate a system which straddles both criminal law and health services provision. Any client you encounter seeking information or assistance to access an abortion may need assistance and referrals to our service. However, all of these practicalities of information access, etc., are compounded for women experiencing domestic violence. They encounter issues about how she could find out where to go, how to make an appointment, and then to have the necessary funds to pay for the procedure. So contraception, pregnancy, and abortion are areas that are complex for many people, including us as practitioners. It's important to be aware of any strong feelings or biases that we as individuals hold so that we can remain client-centred and non-judgmental at all times and never complicit in a perpetrator's reproductive coercion of her. As practitioners, our scope to assist can be limited and we can't all be therapists or medical professionals. However, we can be attuned to the issues and provide options of referrals and support agencies to our clients and be actively involved in the need for systemic reform around Queensland abortion laws. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kath. And I've just put up the referral agencies on the screen for you to have a look at. So I'll now just invite anyone to ask questions. If you've got any questions you'd like to type into the question box or let us know if you want to ask those questions verbally. I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. But while we're waiting for those questions to come through, I'd like to thank Kath very much for coming in today and speaking to us on this really important issue. It is potentially an issue that many people may not have really considered when they think of domestic violence, but certainly something that I think practitioners and CLCs out there, to have on your radar is very helpful to women that you're advising. So there's no questions coming through. Can I just double check that people can hear, or do you have any questions you'd like to ask? On that note, if there aren't any questions coming through, we might end the webinar. And if you do think of any questions later that you'd like to ask Kath, feel free to email those into me and I will be happy to pass them on. Thanks so much, Kath, and thank you everyone for your attention today. Oh, hang on, got a question. Maybe you've just made it in time. Let me just open that up again. All right. Okay, so no questions and I will close up the webinar now. Thanks, everyone.